To our first discuss of today. Despite the introduction of service-based tariff, which has increased electricity bills by over 100%, the service-based tariff, which was pegged on the promise of improved electricity supply, particularly in terms of increased or sustained hours of electricity supply, Nigerians are yet to reap the full benefits, of course, of this development amid the privatization of this sector. The level of frustration of Nigerians over worsening power supply lately is better imagined than experienced, following, in particular, the collapse of several power plants in the country, coupled with constraints of procuring gas to run some others. This situation has adversely impacted on industrial productivity and worsening unemployment, leading to escalation in cost of production as firms who rely on self-generation are folding up as a result of the dire situation. We're in a bid to providing a lasting solution to the myriads of challenges facing the sector. The federal government plans to spend about $3 billion on energy sector in the next 24 months and end the current electricity subsidies by December 2021. The spending, however, is expected to increase the power being wheeled by the Transmission Company of Nigeria, from the current 4,900 megawatts to at least 7,000 megawatts. A very big one there. Well, to discuss this and more and give further details into efforts particularly being made by the federal government aimed at stabilizing and improving electricity supply across the country. I have joining me live from our Abuja studios. He's the special advisor to President Muhammadu Buhari on power and infrastructure, Mr. Ahmad Zakari. Mr. Zakari, good afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Tolu. Thank you for having me on today.
Great. Now, I know you listened to my intro, but one of the biggest conversations Nigerians are having with the state of power and its impact on households and businesses, as well as pricing tariff templates. These are issues that everybody talk about. Despite having more than 8,000 megawatts of operational power capacity in the country, and only about 5,000 can be wheeled out, what do you think, or how did we get to this point? When are we going to have better power infrastructure and supply in Nigeria? Take us through what's been playing out in the sector before we go into some more details.
Thanks, Tolu. Quite a broad question, but I'll try to break it down in segments. The power sector has had systemic challenges, and they're in three groups: regulatory, fiscal, and then on the infrastructure side. On the regulatory side, for years, we've had a regime where distribution companies were buying power at one price, which was high, and they were only allowed to sell it for low prices. This administration has gone a long way to correcting that inefficiency by introducing the service-based tariff. Essentially, that regulatory gap created an investment quagmire, because anybody who put their money into the sector would say, I can't get any money back, and then we had a collapse in investment, particularly on the distribution side, which cascaded up into generation, and also gave us challenges in transmission. Now, the second aspect of that, which is the fiscal challenge, is essentially if the government now has to pay a percentage to make up the gap for the lack of revenue that regulatory imbalance created, that was forcing the government to take hard-earned revenue and subsidize consumption where there was no infrastructure being put in place. And you know, we've talked about it ad nauseum. Many analysis have been done on how we've spent so much money on the power subsidy. Lastly, infrastructure. This administration, under the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari and Engineer Saleh Mama at the Power Ministry, has worked out how to ensure we're putting more infrastructure into the network. That is from the National Mass Metering Program. We're working on emergency interventions through the central bank and commercial bank with the discos, as well as increased transmission investments through our donor partners, as well as incremental support through the Siemens PPI program. All of that is adding up to the $3 billion plus dollars that is actively being spent and will be spent over the next 24 months. And, you know, with the Power Sector Reform Working Group led by His Excellency the Vice President, we monitor this and provide updates to the President on a periodic basis.
A good way to start. The issue of grid collapses is also worrisome, and we have consistently seen a decline in the state of our power plants. What efforts are now being made, let's say in area of facility management? The federal government has appealed to electricity consumers to cooperate with NERC in price review of electricity to be implemented in July. How do we tally these realities?
So Tolu, there's a few questions baked in there. Again, I'll try to break them down. On the issue of grid collapse, I think the metrics are not fully out there. In 2016, if you check the metrics, we had 28 adverse grid events. So 28 times we had a partial or total collapse of the grid. As of last year, we only had 4 events. That's in 2020. And they were all total collapses. In 2021, we've had 1 partial collapse and 1 full collapse. They should not happen. But what I'm doing by providing these metrics is to show you that there is a improvement in the management of the grid, and there is a program planned to invest in a SCADA, which is the system that digitally manages the grid. For instance, we launched EcoDisco has one for its own network. It allows it to monitor all of its feeders and the grid impacts on frequency and voltage, and wherever there's a challenge, it can isolate that segment. So Nigerians should be upset about grid collapses. I'm upset about grid collapses, but I wanted to highlight the improvement through metrics that we've had. Again, 28 adverse grid events in 2016, 4 in 2020, 2 thus far this year, and will continue to improve. In terms of your question around the cooperation on tariff, I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. We must be a nation of rules, laws, and regulations. There's a mandate through the Act that NERC has to check the metrics of the sector every 6 months. And the Act also mandates that NERC needs to communicate this. But unfortunately, every time that is communicated, the media takes it as a tariff increase. It is just the normal course of NERC's work. In some instances, tariff will come down. In some instances, tariff will go up. In some instances, tariff will stay flat. But what this administration has continued to do is, where it feels there's a challenge for citizens, we subsidize. So currently, Band D and E customers are subsidized. They've never increased their tariff throughout the period that we started service-based tariff, apart from some FX and inflation adjustments that were assessed. whereas band A, B, and C are impacted higher. So I think Nigerians should be cautious about the news and fear-mongering that the government is trying to every time impact them on tariff. NERC is just doing its job. They're an independent agency, and government needs to allow them to do their work. If we don't like the results and we feel that our citizens should not be impacted, we'll subsidize in an intelligent manner, focusing on the vulnerable groups of people. That's the commitment that the president has continued to provide through his continued care on the populations of citizens that are less fortunate.
Clarity, because it's very important that we understand how all of this process being undertaken. Now, one of the highlights of this administration, you talked about it in the National Mass Metering Program. We had MAP before this National Mass Metering Program popped up. Now, do you think we can achieve that target of the phased rollout? Another concern is the poor utilization, maybe of local assemblers' capacity to close current deficits faster.
So I think there's a view that we as Nigerians, on one hand, should support Nigerian industry. And then there's another view of expediency on implementation of government programs. We're trying to balance the two. The central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, who has been very, very instrumental to the work that we're doing in the sector, wants us to impact the real sector with the loans that he's given. So for the National Mass Metering Program, we've said that we will fund local manufacturers to deliver the meters, and that's what we'll do. We're already seeing the impact on jobs. These local manufacturers that people would like to criticize have already delivered in excess of 500,000, almost 600,000 meters out of the 1 million in phase 0. And we've already seen that almost 400,000 has been installed, with Ikeja Disco leading the pack with almost 70,000 installed. What we're doing is working. The NMMP, as structured by NERC, CBN, the Ministry of Power, has delivered more meters to Nigerians in 4 months. That's more than 400,000 estimated now, than what we did in 18 months of the entire MAP program. So we feel confident that the 6 million meters that we've committed to, Mr. President, will be delivered and installed to Nigerians free of charge, will be done. And we're on that track. And it's going to create, and it is creating jobs in manufacturing. It's creating jobs in installation, and these are jobs for Nigerians, and we're creating a whole new industry that will help us and our citizens.
Now, let me follow up with that. I need to agree to that fact that this other scheme, I think, is it's really, really operational, because I have also gotten my meter free of charge. So let me attest to that.
Perfect.
So that you will know that is happening. But like the worry is many say we just have assemblers, and we don't. Are we bringing in or importing most of all of these things? How are we trying to fully domesticate some of the contents or all that we use for making up this electronic or digital meters? Are we trying to localize and domesticate production?
So I'm working with the Honorable Minister of State for Labor, as well as the Honorable Minister of State for Power, on our joint technical committee with Labor. I'm the secretary of that committee. One of the things we did in December, we went around and visited local meter manufacturers. For example, MOMAS, led by Engineer Kola Balogun, is actually a full manufacturer of meters in country. They do the full scheme, but they do import some parts, but they're actually a manufacturer. Mojek, does a great job as well with the chairman, Mojisola, Abdul, and Chantel. And we have a number of different meter manufacturers coming up. But I will say that we have a job problem. This administration is okay with people coming in and starting with assembly and integrating the value chain. And through the Ministry of Trade and Industry, they actually certify that there's a plan to transition to manufacturing. But we have a significant job challenge. We will take assembly jobs and installation jobs first, and then, over time, we'll continue to improve. But even today, like I said, if you look at some of the lead players, they actually do a lot more than just assembly. They design their boards, they design the software, and they install and assemble their meters.
Now, President Muhammadu Buhari last year made mentions of collaborations with Siemens, and you talked about that in terms of training and, of course, among other scale-ups. Now, how do we merge this with the agenda, particularly at this time where we have calls for reforms of the power sector after 8 years of privatization? Some still say we need to revisit the process.
So I'll talk about some of the metrics quickly, and then I'll address your question. The service-based tariff implementation has led us to breaking the record for revenues in the sector. In the December period, we had 65 billion. So essentially, tariff was effectively increased by about 36%, especially on the higher bands, but on average 36%. The collections through the work we're doing with the Ministry of Finance and CBN to sequester disco revenues allowed us on a 36% increase in tariff to achieve 63% increase in revenues. That is flowing through the value chain. Now, some will say that that doesn't impact the citizens, but we now checked the other side, and we saw that there was a 15% increase in delivered power, even before the investments in CapEx have started coming through. So our hypothesis is, if there's a business case and discipline in payments, that will see improved liquidity in the sector, and we'll also see increased power delivery, and we're already seeing it. Now, you talk about the Siemens program. Is a very important part of the suite of investments that make up our $3 to $5 billion that we're targeting over the next 24 months. But what I will say is that we have a gap in this sector in distribution only of more than $10 billion. If you add everyone else, you could be up to $30, $40 billion in terms of the other value chain sectors. So what we're doing is all available financing. We're taking it. So for instance, there's the emergency funding from the central bank on metering, in-network CapEx, as well as transmission distribution interfaces. Those are being spent now. You saw the announcement that we'd secured $500 million for DISREP with the World Bank. We're also taking that, and we're also making significant progress on the Siemens PPI, Presidential Power Initiative. So we're on a first come, first serve basis. All funds that are available for the sector, we're putting them into infrastructure. We're moving away from subsidizing consumption. We're making a sector work where if you provide service as a disco, you can collect revenue. That liquidity will flow through the system, and we will now put all of our available resources into infrastructure. As you've stated, these meters are rolling out. You'll see transformer improvements. And as we said, we're going to target to cross the peak of 5,800 megawatts to hit 6,000 up to 7,000, and we're going to target an increase in the average consumption of delivered power. But as I said, we've already seen increases happen. So we're very focused.
Yes, indeed. Let's wrap up now on this note. Yes, we've had gas constraints, at times issues with the thermal plants and all of it. Are we also looking at renewables, energy mix? What are we thinking about aside the regular grid power that we have? Are we also thinking maybe for rural areas, what are we thinking of with regards to power supply for them?
So I think President Muhammadu Buhari and this administration don't get enough credit for how the administration has completely transformed the discussion on rural electrification to one that is renewable based. It's much easier to build a mini grid or install a solar home system than to drag the grid 20, 40 kilometers. It's more cost effective. So this administration has, with the 5 million solar connections program under the Economic Sustainability Plan led by the Vice President, is really boosting the usage of renewables to fill the gap on the millions of Nigerians without access to power. I think many of you reported the launch of that program in Jigawa recently, where 1,000 systems were launched through a private investor partnering with NDPHC in Jengefe, in Roni local government area of Jigawa. So we're going to continue to use renewables to manage the off-grid sector. The Honorable Minister of Power has been on record that we're completing 700 megawatts on Zungeru by the end of the year, and we're going to have a number of solar plants either at the universities or in network in states like Kaduna, through Connexa and through the Green Agri-Allied Industrial Zone, as well as others around the country pop up. So we're very focused on renewables, and we're putting our money where our mouth is, for lack of a better term, with the 140 billion in funding that's being facilitated through the Central Bank of Nigeria with the Ministry of Power and the Rural Electrification Agency. We plan to have 30% of power in Nigeria be renewable by 2030.
I think that's a good way to leave it, Mr. Ahmad Zakari. We expect more, and we'll keep a tab on you. You bring us up to speed with whatever is happening in the sector. Nigerians will appreciate when they get to hear all of this and understand what they should be expecting with regards to the sector. The sector remains very sensitive. We appreciate your time. Special Advisor, President Muhammadu Buhari on Power Infrastructure, Mr. Ahmad Zakari. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. We appreciate this.
Thanks, Tolu.